As a leader in your practice, you know that a busy day doesn't always mean profitable one. So it's a common challenge to bridge that gap between the activity within a practice every single day and then the end of month financial health. So today's podcast is going to be about the top 3 metrics to watch and measure.
Welcome to NatRevMD, a podcast where we share tips on optimizing medical billing and improving practice efficiency so you can have the business of your dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Signorelli, founder of NatRevMD. Let's get started.
This is the start of a 3-part series where we're going to talk about the metrics that you need and the decisions to make in order to help drive profitability. So we've had the opportunity to work with close to 50 different practices between consulting arrangements and RCM services over the last few years. And one of the practices we were working with had identified that while their partners were working harder than ever, their take-home pay had been flat for 3 years. So we focused on expenses, on some core metrics around revenue per visit, revenue per provider, and then operating margin in order to start shifting decisions in order to make them more profitable. One of the opportunities that they identified was with contracting and credentialing, where they needed to renegotiate their rates. They were a larger practice. They were able to get in there and look at the data around what everybody else around them within their subspecialty, within their state was getting paid for certain, this was an OB practice for certain global maternity codes, and they were below the regional benchmark. And so their operating margin was about 28%, but by focusing on these numbers and focusing on renegotiation of those contracts, they were able to improve their operating margin to 40% within about 12 months. So this created a $1.2 million positive swing for their practice, which was very meaningful for their team, obviously. So today we're going to explore those metrics. So first we'll talk about the metrics. We'll talk a little bit about why these are important strategically, and then how to go about working with your team to get these and start moving the needle on these. So metric number 1 is revenue per visit. That's RPV. So this is your practice's average reimbursement for each patient encounter, right? We've talked about this before, but plain English, it's the average price basically that you're getting paid. So that's top line. And this is, if it's low, right, that you're selling inexpensive services. If it's high, that means that you're getting paid probably value for what you are seeing. And this is, a high level view. You can get into the weeds and look at this revenue per CPT code on an average. There's even data out there that actually shows and benchmarks your practices data, uses your MPI number compared to other practices that are in your same subspecialty and same area. There are services that can look at these metrics to help you utilize and see where you're at, so that then you can negotiate with your payers and basically be able to push them, because it's not this blind spot of not understanding where you're at in the field. You have clear data. And actually, this is part of the Transparency Act, where payers have to actually publish this data. It's very hard to get to, but there's some companies that have aggregated that data and then sell that data to be used, again, to benchmark where your practice is at. So obviously, a lower than expected revenue per visit is going to be a key area and opportunity. And this can be anything from evaluating your coding, make sure you're not undercoding, evaluating your payer contracts. Again, this metric basically gives you those powerful levers to pull, right? It helps you with renegotiation and helps you with, coding audits and training, right? A low RPV could be traced back to undercoding. So you do want to make sure that you're doing regular chart audits. And then obviously service mix. And payer mix, both of these are going to contribute to your RPV. So service mix is if you're doing a lot of procedures versus wellness visits, that's going to change your RPV. Now, if you are seeing more Medicaid or payers that pay you less, that is going to impact your RPV. And so when you think about these metrics, if you want to drive up that RPV, then it's really looking at coding accuracy. It's looking at payer negotiations, and then your payer mix. Obviously, payer mix may be geographical or just may be also, the patient mix that you serve. But again, these are things to balance as you're trying to drive profitability in your practice. All right, metric number 2, we've talked about this before, but revenue per provider. So again, this is the total cash collected, so receipts per provider per month. This is obviously the individual's contribution to the practice, right? To their share of the revenue. And again, this isn't about creating competition because we know that mid-levels may have different revenue generating ability than another physician, or some physicians may be more procedural versus others are doing more clinic work. That's all fine, but it allows you to understand that mix so that you can make sure that that contribution for each member is weighted when you think about their compensation, that you also make sure that everybody's on the same page and understanding comp and coverage of the overhead, and making sure that you aren't upside down on any one individual provider. Also helps you identify your high performers. What are they doing from a workflow perspective? Are they seeing more patients? Is it a payer mix? Is it services provided? So that then you can identify those trends and then be able to identify your maybe your bottom tier individuals in the practice who need some additional help and support. So these are all important things for you to understand and monitor month over month. And I know you may be listening and maybe you're the owner of the practice or the manager, and you haven't carved out time to sit there and strategically look at these. I highly, highly recommend doing that, once or twice a month, really understanding what is this data. Because again, at the end of the day, profitability is going to be one of the most important things that you can do for your patients, because you get to keep your doors open. You get to compensate your physicians and providers fairly and be able to drive market growth within your practice. So some levers here that you can pull when you know this information by provider is obviously you can target provider training. So if you have physicians who are consistently low with their revenue per provider, it's an opportunity to target training, right? Is it coding and documentation? Is it volume? Is it workflows? And so all of these things are really important for you to understand so that then you can drive change. Incentive programs. Do you have compensation plans that reward your physicians for improving their individual revenue? So obviously aligning their goals with the practice's goals is really, really key. The other thing is workload balancing, right? So understanding each other's revenue generation helps you balance workloads. So you can make sure that you're not burning out some of your most productive people, but maybe you have some newer providers who don't have quite the patient base, but maybe they could help take some workload off of somebody who's busier. As long as, the person who's busy is okay with that, obviously, because maybe they're incentivized to be busy. So important to know and to kind of understand these. The last metric that you must follow is operating margin. So this is the ultimate measure of profitability. And so important to understand that that is total revenue minus total operating expenses divided by total revenue. Margin basically means percent. And so you're looking at the percentage here, right? So for every dollar that comes into your practice, this is the number of cents you get to keep as a profit after you've been paid. Now, this excludes things like owner salaries. It is, that's the profit pool available for owner compensation and reinvestment. So if your operating margin is 35%, that means for every $100 you collect, right, you get $35 left over to pay yourself. Now, that means that, you had the other $65 going to rent, payroll, supplies. And again, for healthy practices, you want to shoot for that target of 35 to 40%. So now, how can you use this number? So let's say your profit margin, your operating margin, it's different than profit margin. That operating margin is 28%. So you now have a powerful question to ask yourself. Is this a revenue problem or an expense problem? So then you can look at that revenue per visit and see if you are below where you should be. If you can change that lever, again, we talked about those levers, looking at that revenue per visit, revenue per provider, see if you can shift that in a higher direction, right? Again, looking at volume of patients seen, patient payer mix, provider mix, looking at your individual providers to see who could potentially generate more income, who has bandwidth to do that. The next thing is looking at your expenses. We had a practice that we worked with that looked at their telephone bill. It was $5,000 a month. They don't know how it got that high. It just kind of started increasing slowly over time. Certainly didn't need that. And so they were able to cut that down. They were also able to cut some accounting fees down. So definitely this is something that if you guys aren't doing a deep dive on every month, you want to start doing. Also looking at staffing costs. Are they too high for your current patient volume? Is your medical supply vendor overcharging you? Can you go back to them and renegotiate? Again, everything that you can do to squeeze that operating margin to give you a starting point to investigate and to make improvements. Levers here are top expense categories. Can you renegotiate your lease? Can you switch to a more cost-effective medical supplier? Optimize staffing levels. Obviously, revenue optimization. We talk about this a lot, but are you collecting enough? You can look at those RCM metrics, improving your revenue per visit, ensuring that all of your providers are maximizing their revenue potential. If there's MIPS or quality programs you can join, incentive programs, those are all things for you to be able to review and look at. And then obviously a healthy operating margin is going to give you that confidence to invest in growth. So that could be hiring another physician if you have room for that, opening a new location, or upgrading technology that you need in order to be more efficient. So obviously, really, really important. If you don't have a financial person who's sitting with you and going over these, highly recommend that you start with these three. And these can kind of really lead you into understanding three different things, right? So it allows you to understand if there is or creating opportunity for strategic investment. So high charge numbers can create that sense of security, right? We all know that. So charges are kind of the funny money, but going over the three metrics we just went over really helps solidify what's truly going on in your practice and be honest with yourself on what's working and not working. And if that means you don't have the volume, how do you get the volume of those patients? What marketing tactics are working? If physicians aren't fully scheduled, then how can they be going to meet with peers or community groups in and around the area in order to do some marketing, right? I think the most successful practices we've worked with aren't just relying on marketing from a marketing company, right? Ads, that's one part of it, but you really want to make sure that you have multiple different levers in that marketing area in order to drive volume and growth. The other opportunity here, knowing these numbers, is to nurture your team, right? A feeling of just busy but broke is exhausting, both on you and the other leaders, the other partners. But when you focus on profitability, you can ensure that the team's hard work is being translated into real success, and be open about it with everybody because they want to be rewarded. You want to align compensation with this goal. And then, of course, invest in the high performers, but also drive a culture where everyone feels like they're part of a winning team and preventing burnout and being able to be sustainable. And then last, like we said, recognizing those most valuable players. Every practice has them. You just need to know who they are, celebrate that, identify what their tactics are, and help make sure that maybe the lower performing providers have help and support in order to get there as well. And that may mean, what does it take in order to get their schedule full? Are we calling if they've got slots available to get patients scheduled? Again, it takes looking and understanding these metrics in order to understand what levers to pull. So when you look at these profitability metrics, you can see this clearly, right? You can identify and celebrate from, your profitable service lines, your profitable facilities, profitable physicians, and then offer and support to train and help increase those who are not as successful. So obviously, this is why we've developed a couple different resources for you guys. So the first is the Margin Protection Playbook. This is really looking at patient AR. You can check out the link in the comments below. You can also go to natrevmd.com/margin-playbook. And we also have an eligibility toolkit that can be used. Again, the link is at the bottom, or you can go to natrev.com/eligibility-billing-verification. So hopefully these tips kind of help as far as kind of those 3 steps you can do. So I would recommend starting with your RPV, so that revenue per visit. If you have multiple service lines or multiple facilities, you're going to want to look at that. Each of those, you can work with your accounting team to be able to kind of understand this. Take a look again at that total collections, which is divided by your total number of visits, even just the last, 6 months. And then you can again look at that overall and then by different segments within your company. You could get more detailed and look at this for your top codes. You can also work with a credentialing team who can help get you that data to benchmark your own practices reimbursement compared to your peers, so you can see if there's a renegotiation opportunity. The other thing is creating a simple dashboard, right? For our practices, we do provide the revenue per month for the providers at the end of the month. Again, this is super simple, just shows both their charges and their receipts by month. And so tracking that over time enables you to identify trends so that you could have supportive conversations again with those physicians who may need either better efficiency in the office, more appointments scheduled, or potentially even coding habits. And then last, calculating and monitoring that operating margin every single month. And this does require a bit of time with the accountant because, again, you're having to take out those operational expenses, again, excluding any owner salaries, but it does allow you to monitor that by month. And again, there are some subspecialty benchmarks that are out there, but again, that 35 to 40% is really healthy. And we know that sometimes that may be as low as 20 or 25%. And then again, how are you spending that money on owner salary in order to be able to understand true profitability of the practice? I hope this was helpful. Again, 3-part series. We're going to do 2 more, just again on these quick metrics that every practice must be watching. Not just with regards to RCM, we'll talk a little bit about that as well, but more just about practice health overall. So hopefully you enjoyed this session. And as always, if you have questions or want to suggest a topic, reach on out at info@natrevmd.com. We also have a free billing metric review on our website, top right-hand corner on the homepage. So you can check that out and see if you qualify. And we're happy to take a look at your metrics and see if our team would be the right fit for your practice. All right, have a great week.